But largely, on the large whole, even I wave the St George's flag on a sporting occasion, and I don't see anything wrong in raising your Union Jack or the St George's flag, so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country, and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening. Well, Keir Starmer U-turns on a big green pledge. I'll be asking, is there really any difference now between the two parties? It was over 50 years ago, but a British soldier is now up on a murder charge for what happened in Northern Ireland in 1972. Isn't it time we drew a line under the whole thing? An extraordinary story of a migrant living on Dover Beach that wants to leave the country, but the authorities won't let him. And Tucker Carlson has interviewed Putin. It'll be out at 11 p.m. tonight, UK time. Was he right to go and do the interview? All of that and much more after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that Labour has confirmed it's axing billions of pounds from its commitment to environmental issues. Sir Keir Starmer said today the pledge, one of the party's flagship policies, will be scaled back to almost £24 billion instead of the original £28 billion. He says Labour has had to cut back on their warm homes plan to insulate millions of houses over the next decade. He went on, though, to blame the Tories for a very broken economy, adding he didn't want a row about the size of a cheque.
The reason for that is because since we announced the £28 billion, the Tories have done terrible damage to our economy, not just the Liz Truss budget, but also now the government briefing that it's going to max out on the government credit card. Reckless, but I have to anticipate the circumstances as they are now, not as I'd wish them to be.
Starmer speaking a short time ago. Well, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Laura Trott, said today's announcement confirms Labour doesn't have a plan for Britain.
For months, Labour have been saying that their 2030 energy policies are going to cost £28 billion. And all that's happened today is that they confirmed that they don't have a plan to pay for that. Not having a plan inevitably means imposing higher taxes on working people, and that is why Labour would take Britain back to square one.
Laura Trott. Now, in other news today, armed police have searched 2 addresses in Newcastle in their hunt for chemical attack suspect Abdul Azidi. It's understood the search warrants included his place of work, but no arrests were made. Azidi is believed to be suffering from severe facial injuries, which could be life-threatening if left untreated. The last recorded sighting of him was near Vauxhall Bridge in London, just after 11 o'clock last Wednesday evening. In the United States, Donald Trump says all cases against him are an act of election interference. That's after a US Supreme Court heard arguments to determine whether or not he can run in November's US election. The state of Colorado disqualified him because of his role in the US Capitol riots. The state of Maine followed suit. Mr. Trump has had the support, though, of most voters in challenging Democratic President Joe Biden. Republican contender Nikki Haley has said in the last half hour that everything Trump touches is chaos and Republicans keep losing as a result. Here, protesters who cover their faces to avoid arrest could face tougher penalties under new laws unveiled today. Demonstrators would also be blocked from climbing war memorials or letting off flares. Citing the right to protest will no longer be an excuse for causing major disruption as the Home Office seeks to crack down on what it's calling dangerous disorder. Critics say the new powers represent a threat to civil liberties. And finally, NatWest Bank has appointed a new former UBS executive to lead its high net worth banking arm, Coutts. Emma Crystal is going to take the top job, reporting directly to NatWest's interim chief executive, Paul Thwaite. It's understood she'll also join the board of Coutts. It comes more than 6 months after the resignation of Peter Flavel in the wake of Nigel Farage's Coutts debanking scandal. For the very latest GB News stories, do sign up for GB News alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, it was the magical, mystical 28 billion. Yes, this was the amount of money that Labour were going to spend in government to prove they're even greener than the Conservative Party. And the money was going to be spent on insulating millions of homes and adding to green prosperity. Well, they were pretty clear about it. And even within the last 4 days, we've had Keir Starmer saying we're sticking to the plan.
The 28 billion comes in, that investment that's desperately needed for that mission. And I've been unwavering in relation to the mission.
We are doing it.
When?
We're doing it in the next Parliament.
OK, towards the end of the next Parliament?
I can't tell you a precise day of the week and what month it's going to be, but our determination, our plan, our intent is to get it done. Now, you know, of course, it won't be on day one because you can't wave a wand and suddenly create a British energy company.
Will it be 28 billion?
It will be 20.
Well, that was Sir Chris Bryant backing up Keir Starmer, both of those clips taken from earlier on this week. And then, here's Sir Keir Starmer, leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, this morning.
What won't now happen is that we won't make further or new investment decisions, and that means that we won't reach the £28 billion envisaged, and that figure is effectively stood down. The reason for that is because since we announced the 28 billion, the Tories have done terrible damage to our economy, not just the Liz Truss budget, but also now the government briefing that it's going to max out on the government credit card.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Another point of difference between Labour and Conservative that has totally disappeared. In fact, I'm really struggling quite hard when it comes to economics, when it comes to tax, when it comes to immigration policy. In fact, I'm struggling, apart from putting VAT on private school fees, I'm struggling to find any real point of difference between these two parties. It's as if we've got two big state social democrat parties, but nobody really bold enough. Nobody bold enough to suggest, you know what? We're going to give the country real leadership here. This is the direction we're going to go in. This is why we're doing it, and we encourage you to join us. I suppose, to be fair, the only two leaders in my lifetime that I've seen that have done that at a national level and become Prime Minister were Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, both of whom were unafraid of saying things that were radical, were different, and genuinely would bring change to the country. So I put it to you folks at home. You tell me, what is the difference between the Labour and Conservative parties as we head well into this election year? Please give me your thoughts, farage@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined in the studio by Stella Chantakidou, Public Affairs Consultant and former Labour advisor. Welcome to the programme. And we will be having Bob Seeley, MP from the Isle of Wight, down the line as well. Stella, the point I'm making is And, you know, whether you think the 28 billion was a good idea or a bad idea,
yes.
I don't think it was a very good idea, but that's by the by. The fact is, it was one of those standout points of difference, if you like. Now, you know, they agree, of course, totally on net zero. They agree completely on building as many wind turbines in the North Sea as possible. But this was a point of difference. Now that it's gone, you know, if I'm voting on environmental concerns, whether I'm very pro net zero or very sceptical about net zero, the point I'm trying to make here is I can't see the difference.
The difference, there is a full list of policies that Labour is proposing that the Conservatives are not proposing.
Go on.
Right, so GB Energy, 2030 net target, which has been also...
We're decarbonising the grid, but in fact the Conservatives are saying much the same thing as that, to be honest.
They are also going to invest a further 6.6 billion on insulating homes.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I find it very interesting, Nigel. You mentioned Tony Blair, and you said that he's one of the last leaders who you remember having a very bold message.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether Tony Blair, the first time he got elected, whether he had bold policies, as you say. I think his messaging was very good. I think he was seen as very aspirational, as a very responsible leader.
Well, I mean, he said, look, we are going to massively increase spending in the National Health Service. We are going to reduce waiting times. And you know, he did actually do that.
He didn't say we're going to massively increase spending. He said we're going to invest. But if you actually look at his manifestos, and Tony Blair himself used to say, right before every election, he would take the manifesto, he would go somewhere by himself, and he would bomb-proof it to make sure that there is no excuse for any broadcaster, any conservative media wonk to say, what is this? You're going to spend more money, you're going to make us bankrupt, and all of it.
Yeah, this is the fear. I mean, listen, I've been through this as a party leader, going to elections, you produce a manifesto, you know you're going to be torn to pieces, but in terms of messaging, I always thought Blair would, we're going back a long time, but I thought Blair was clear. Get to today, I honestly, when it comes to green policy, when it comes to economics, when it comes to tax and many other things, do you agree with me on one thing, Stella? These parties are now remarkably the same.
Absolutely not. Who do you trust to transform the economy? Do you trust the woman who worked for the Bank of England and who has shown she's strong enough to crack the whip and change policy when the fact changed? Because who could have predicted in 2021, when Rachel Reeves announced this number, that the Tories would crush the economy with Liz Truss's budget, that the war in Ukraine would go the way it did, that the Middle East would be literally on fire?
None of that can be attributed to failure by the Tory government. These are events, dear boy.
These are events for the Liz Truss's budget can totally be attributed.
I have heard nothing from Rachel Reeves about, for example, the size of our deficit, any different to the Conservative Party whatsoever. It's as if there's this gigantic elephant in the room, £110 billion a year interest payments. I can't see the difference.
Because austerity was a failed policy. Chasing the deficit is a failed policy. Economists across the political spectrum will say this. And here is where...
So just go on borrowing forever.
Here is where I think we will find some agreement, Nigel. I really don't like it when politicians of any party continue to follow whatever narrative is being served by the media, by broadcasters, by pundits, because obviously the job of the media, the job of pundits is to make policy making difficult, is to challenge politicians.
Which is a good thing in a way.
It's a good thing in a way, but I believe that politicians need to hold the line. And you need to create an alternative narrative.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is I'm not hearing that alternative narrative. I mean, take the cross-channel. I mean, OK, Labour doesn't believe in Rwanda, but it believes in going after the gangs. When Labour are asked about legal net migration, there's nothing to say that's any different to where the Conservatives are at all. There isn't much. I mean, this is not an election where we're choosing between two ideologies.
It is not an election when we are choosing between ideologies, because ideologies are no longer relevant when the people are struggling with a cost of living crisis where they cannot go another day. So this is not about ideology. It's about looking at the facts. And you have to be nuanced with policy. And to go back to the 28 billion Green Investment Fund, what Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves tried to do is something very ambitious. They tried to start a new policy from scratch. They started a blank slate. Usually when you have governments have policy wins, they are building on something that already exists.
Well, I tell you what, whatever they were doing, it's gone now, and that's the point, and that's why you're here talking to me. Down the line, joining me is Bob Seeley, Conservative Member of Parliament for the Isle of Wight. Bob, good evening. You know, I had Kwasi Kwarteng in last week, sitting exactly where Stella is, and I was asking him to outline some really key economic differences between Labour and the Conservatives. He struggled. I now think on green policy, this 28 billion, good idea or bad idea, is gone. Point I'm making, Bob, is there aren't fundamental differences now between the two parties.
OK, I don't for one second believe that. And actually, frankly, Nigel, I don't think that you believe it for one second.
No, I do.
Before I start, by the way, I'm at a scout hut in Shanklin in my constituency. Rosie, the assistant scout leader here, her husband Alex was secretary of the West Kent Golf Club, and they send their regards. They apparently said that you've had many a happy evening there. OK, when it comes to your points, we're bringing down. There are two different directions at the next election. Yeah, the Conservatives bringing down tax, bringing down migration.
Sorry.
Realism on. Let me finish. Realism on net zero. Realism on gender recognition. Being proud of our history, not ashamed of it. Being proud of our identity, not ashamed of it. Supporting Brexit, not trying to get back in the European Union, and Rwanda. I'll start with those. So let's not pretend. I know that you want to say these are all urban liberal elites all doing the same thing. That is categorically not true.
Bob, I mean, on tax, you know, it is a Conservative government that has given us the highest tax, burden since World War II. So that doesn't work.
Nigel, do you know why? Because we've had COVID and we spent 350 billion on COVID. And then we had the Ukraine inflationary shock.
I know.
And then we spent 93 billion on that. Look, we all know that tax is too high. The point is that we are going to bring it down.
Bob,
the Labour Party complain about...
Yeah, I don't believe that, and that's the point. And actually, you're right about the COVID cost. Your government locked us down for a second and third time, wholly unnecessarily. But where I do agree with you, there are some differences on cultural issues. And we saw that perhaps writ large at PMQs yesterday. And I think, you know, Keir Starmer's inability, Stella, to really define what a woman is, they are perhaps key differences.
Absolutely not. Keir Starmer has defined what woman is plenty of times, and frankly, it's not for politicians to waste their time on something like this, let alone when you have the mother of a murdered trans child. If anything shows you that Rishi Sunak is unfit to rule, it's his reaction, his political tenure on that. But I will come back to your question and tell you what's the difference between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. The difference between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party is that the Conservative Party had 14 years to fix this, and not only have they not fixed our broken economy and our falling infrastructure, they've ruined it completely.
OK, fine. I'm going to give Bob Seeley the final few sentences. I'm not going to interrupt you at all, Bob. You've heard what Stella's had to say. Give me the case after 14 years of why. And it was interesting that Rishi Sunak said, we're the party of change. Tell me why voting Conservative will bring change, better change to people's lives.
Because, Nigel, we've had a world that's marked by before and after COVID and before and after the Ukraine war, and we've had to react to those events. Is Brexit are the benefits of Brexit taking longer to deliver? For sure, because horrendous real-world things have got in our way. But there is a philosophical difference between Labour and Conservatives and a practical one, and a vote for any other Conservative party apart from the Conservatives will let in Labour for 5 years or more. And I'm afraid to say that is going to be a lot worse than, in your eyes, an imperfect Conservative government. We're getting there, and there are significant differences, and they will become increasingly obvious.
Thank you, Bob Seeley, very much. Regards to all at the Scout Hut. Stella, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
And folks, you know, we have allowed people representing both parties to have their say. I'm looking forward to your answers. I still don't think there are really, really big differences between the two. But hey, in a moment, we will talk about something that happened in 1972 in Northern Ireland, where a British Army soldier now is on a murder charge and 3 others on a charge of attempted murder. I thought Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister, said we were going to draw a line under all of this. It appears we're not. I'll be joined in a moment by Simon Weston, CBE.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of 3 abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves, people are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel, and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we had that spirited debate with both Labour and Conservative representatives telling us how different they are. What's your reaction to the question I posed? One viewer says, no difference between them at all. Waste of time voting for either of them. Douglas says it's a choice between dumb and dumber. And Trevor, no, I like this one. Trevor says the difference between Tories and Labour, one is red and one is blue. And that's pretty much how I feel about the whole thing right now. Now, you'll remember as we went into the last general election, Boris Johnson saying that it really was time that we drew a line under the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And as a result of that, a piece of legislation did, in the end, go through Parliament. Not until Veterans Minister Johnny Mercer had resigned, but we do now have a Legacy Act, which comes into law fully later this year. The trouble is, any investigations or cases that were pending are not stopped by it. And so we've learnt overnight that from an incident or incidents in 1972, a former British Army soldier is going to be facing a murder trial, and 3 other British Army soldiers will be facing attempted murder. Now, this worries me very greatly. Indeed, the Legacy Act itself has been challenged in the European Court of Human Rights by the Irish government, but there's a set of huge double standards here. You see, part of the Good Friday Agreement, and it was something that I struggled with at the time, was the release back into the community of over 400 convicted murderers. That's right, 400 convicted murderers had their prison sentence ended, were sent back into the community. They came, of course, from both sides of the divide, and that was part of the amnesty, part of a deal that led to what has been a much better period of peace in Northern Ireland. And yet, we're still going back and going after soldiers from 1972. And I wonder, Simon Weston, CBE, of course, well-known British Army veteran from the Falklands War. I wonder, Simon, and welcome again to the programme, thank you. I wonder, we're hearing about terrible recruitment problems. I wonder whether cases like this send a message that if you've served in the British Army, you're not really going to get looked after very well.
Well, that's the truth, Nigel. This is doing nothing for recruitment. And if somebody was to ask me today, would I advise a young person to join, looking at the way that they're going after service personnel now, it's a double standard, as you've already alluded to, that they released all these prisoners, gave them amnesty, but the amnesty doesn't exist for anybody else. But would you join if you could be historically dragged into court 40, 50, 60 years later, when you're reaching your late 70s, early 80s, maybe even your late 80s, and then thrown in jail for the last years of your life? I don't know, there's a terrible double standard going on, but then again, what do we expect? Nobody's showing any great leadership on any of this. I thought Boris Johnson had done what he said he would do, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case, certainly not for now anyway. And in the foreseeable future, will people still be able to go after it through the European courts when we are no longer a part of Europe? So I just don't know where it goes, but it certainly doesn't fill me with any eager sense that I should encourage other young people to join. I know from my own personal experience that people are leaving in great numbers because they feel that things aren't working for them in the British military. So I don't know where it goes from here, Nigel.
Well, when Simon Weston says that really you should think twice before joining the British Army, we really do have a very major problem. And I worry, actually, Simon, about defence as a whole. I mean, here we are with the Middle East blowing up, with an ongoing sort of World War I style slaughterhouse happening in Ukraine. We've got constant bellicose threats from China when it comes, of course, to the islands, and Taiwan threatened directly. I wonder, Simon, do we need a complete change of thinking in terms of how we deal with the military and how we deal with the 3 services?
I think, first of all, we have to get rid of this banal thought process that there's ever a peace dividend to be achieved after we've been in conflict and we come out and then they decide to slash the services. If we're to be believed to be any type of support for any peace in the world, we have to have a strong armed forces. Whether people like that or not is not really relevant. If you want to live a safe and secure life, we need to be able to secure our own borders and support other nations when they go forward to protect others who can't protect themselves. And at the moment, we really can't. Even my regiment, I know, is massively under strength. And they've had terrible incidents in the Falklands just in the last 2 weeks when they had a truck go off the road and 19 guys end up in hospital. So they've had some real problems. But the whole of the armed forces, my goodness, they aren't big enough to be a dad's army, let alone to be an army of support for the European Union or anybody else, for NATO or anything at the moment. And we need to readdress all of that. We need to be seen to be able to support. And the many Americans have come forward and said that what we're doing is not good enough. Many people in NATO have said the same.
Yes, I mean, as you know, I go to America regularly, talk to a lot of senior, mostly former, but some serving military commanders in America, and they all say, for 100 years, we've been great allies, we've worked together, we've always had a huge respect for the British forces, but we're now beginning to ask, are they big enough to be a serious player?
Well, that seems to be the case, certainly, and they want to diminish it more. And then they've always said, we'll rely on the reservists. Now, the reservists are very good, very professional. They've had plenty of time to get it right. But they still are only around about 12 or 14,000 when they were talking about, when they were slashing the forces, the options for change, that they were going to create 20, 30, 40,000 reservists. But why would anybody join the military when they said you can get paid like a regular service person when you're already earning £50,000? Why would you want to earn 11,000? Because an ordinary service person is only earning about £22,000, £24,000 a year. So, why would you take a pay cut to go and risk your life? And the money is a big thing. Lots of service people are struggling just with the cost of living, the same as everybody else. But a dustbin man is earning far more than a professional soldier. That can't be right. That cannot be right. I'm not knocking dustbin men. They do a great job because, we all need them. But at the end of the day, we need service people and we need them to be paid properly so that they can take their children on holiday, buy their children things and support themselves and buy a property as well when they leave the armed forces, be able to contribute into a larger pension pot. Because a lot of service people don't really live a great life when they leave. Some do, some don't. And we have to protect all of them and make it possible for them all to live properly. And I don't think that's the case right now.
Simon Weston said with very great passion and conviction. And in this general election year, let's hope that we can have a lot more debate about what we're doing with our armed forces. Simon, as ever, absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. Wow, some strong stuff there. In a moment, we'll talk about the Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin. It'll play out on X, of course, at 11 p.m. this evening. Was he right to go to Moscow? And we'll also look at the extraordinary story of the migrant living under a dinghy on Dover Beach who wants to go back to Europe, but the British authorities won't let him. What on earth is going on?
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's sake,
basically,
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah. But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Tucker Carlson has been a huge figure in American broadcasting for many, many years. And of course, now because of the internet, he's seen across pretty much the whole of the English-speaking world. He lost his job as the top-rated presenter at Fox News. He now does his thing on X, and he gets big audiences. And even his announcement that he was going to Moscow, he did a little video to say, I'm going to go and interview Vladimir Putin. Even that got 100 million views on X. Was he right to go? Well, our newspapers and many in America have been wall-to-wall saying it's a huge mistake. This proves he's Putin's puppet. He's said things in the past that are very critical about Ukraine. He doesn't want any American money going to Ukraine. He'll be used as a propaganda tool by Vladimir Putin. And those arguments are strong, and there are many, many of them. Equally, there are people that say, look, talk about journalism in Moscow, just look at the dozens of journalists that have disappeared or been killed over the course of the last few years. They are the arguments against Tucker Carlson going, but I actually think who very much took the view that he should go was Candace Owens, and I spoke to her last night. Now, somebody whose brain is without doubt very, very agile, and he's been a great, huge TV fixture in America, is, of course, Tucker Carlson. Do you think Tucker is wise? Do you think he's wise going to Moscow and doing a sit-down with Putin?
He's incredibly wise, and he is also not just wise, he's brave. There obviously has been a lot of lies sold to us. You can just go back and look at what the mainstream media was saying on the first day that Russia invaded Ukraine. It's much of their emotional engineering. People didn't understand what was happening, but we were told that we just have to be okay with billions of dollars going overseas. And this is what I refer to as the political commentariat, where they're controlling your ideas, but you actually don't have access to true information. They're not telling you what the other president that's involved in this conflict is saying. If you dare to share that information, you're being called a Putin puppet. It's pointedly ridiculous. Yeah. We need more information. In America, we believe in this radical idea of free speech. And Tucker Carlson doing that interview, conducting it despite the fact that the NSA was spying on him, spying on his text messages, trying to prevent that from happening, seeing the way that they are reacting, reading news today that the EU is considering sanctioning Tucker Carlson regarding an interview that they have not even seen, is all you need to know that the majority of the news that you are watching is bought and paid for, and they work to serve the state. And Tucker Carlson has gotten around that, and every individual should watch this interview, not because you should agree with everything that Putin says, but because you should hear different sides and come to conclusions after researching what both sides are saying.
No, I agree with you, and, you know, I understand the frustration in America with sending this money abroad. I understand the corruption of Ukraine, of course I do. However, I will say to you, Candace, that if you were living in Poland right now, or Western Ukraine, you might be a little bit frightened by what Putin's doing.
Of course. By the way, you would always be frightened if you live in any circumstance, where you have people that are having a war near your borders, right? We're frightened by the war that's happening on our border right now and being told that we shouldn't care about it because we should care more about Ukraine's borders. It's pointedly foolish, you know? So to say that you want to hear what is the reason that we are funding this war does not also mean that you don't feel sympathetic towards Ukrainians or sympathetic towards any innocent civilians that are being impacted by war anywhere across the world. It says You're telling me that I need to wake up in the morning and I need to go to work so that you can extract tax dollars from me to go overseas to be sent to Ukrainians, unaccounted tax dollars, because they always magically lose this accounting, the Pentagon. They have no idea where the money is going. We deserve an explanation, an honest explanation of what we are doing in Ukraine, because to say that we are not at war with Ukraine is simply untrue. We are fighting a proxy war with Russia. I want to hear all sides of the equation, and that does not remove my sympathies for how I feel about any person, Russian or Ukrainian, any innocent civilian who has been impacted by the conflict.
You're absolutely right. In a free democracy, we should hear all sides of the argument before we make up our minds on where we are. And I'll give my reaction to the interview on GB News Breakfast tomorrow morning at about 9 o'clock. Now, the What the Farage moment, an extraordinary story. Ala Eldin, he's Syrian. He ran away from Syria because he didn't want to be conscripted. He came to the UK by dinghy in 2021. He then absconded from a migrant hotel to work in the illegal economy. He now finds himself living under that dinghy on Dover Beach. He's trying to get on the back of a lorry to get back into Europe because he doesn't want to stay here anymore, and the British authorities keep stopping him from going. And actually, this is a really funny one because we could just send him back to Syria. But Syria is on a list of countries that we do not deport people to, and we have no agreement with the European Union. And so despite the fact he wants to leave, he's stuck here. And we now have the really odd sight on TikTok of people who've illegally come to Britain, now illegally going back to Europe. Having said that, the percentage that go back is very, very small. Now, we asked the Home Office for a comment on this seemingly extraordinary case, and they said it is long-standing government policy that we do not routinely comment on individual cases. If an individual does not have the right to be in the UK, we'll make every effort to return to their country of origin or a safe third country. Yes, I know all of that. The point is, he's from Syria, and you don't deem Syria to be safe, and we have no third-party agreement. What a waste of space. Now, the row in the House of Commons yesterday, in some ways, it's a very Westminster story. You know, it doesn't affect the cost of living directly, but maybe it tells us something about our next potential Prime Ministers. Let's remind ourselves of what happened at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday.
But it's a bit rich, Mr. Speaker, to hear about promises from someone who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I think I counted almost 30 in the last year. Pensions, planning, peerages, public sector pay, tuition fees, childcare, second referendums, defining a woman. Although in fairness, that was only 99% of a U-turn.
Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber, shame. Parading as a man of integrity when he's got absolutely no responsibility.
Oh, the level of moral indignation, and it was followed up on Twitter by Jess Phillips and many over the course of yesterday. Big demands that Sunak apologises. Let's have a look what he had to say.
Like everyone, I was completely shocked by Brianna's case. To have your child taken from you in such awful circumstances is almost impossible to come to terms with. To use that tragedy to detract from the very separate and clear point I was making about Keir Starmer's proven track record of multiple U-turns on major policies because he doesn't have a plan, I think is both sad and wrong, and it demonstrates the worst of politics.
Well, he's not apologising, and he's probably right not to apologise. Interesting, though, that Penny Mordaunt, favoured by some to be the next leader, seemed to think that he should apologise, but then she tends to be that way on these issues. What does it tell us about our leaders? Well, it says that what Starmer was doing was, frankly, using the murder of that young trans person, Brianna, to try and make a political point-scoring point in Prime Minister's Questions by saying, look, you know, there's the mother up in the gallery of the balcony. Something that Jacob Rees-Mogg pointed out to us was a completely against parliamentary rules. And I'll be asking him in quarter of an hour, I'll be asking Jacob, has the Speaker done anything to enforce the rules? I think this episode says more about Starmer than it does about Sunak. Now, the What the Farage moment to finish with. Coutts Bank. You'll remember Peter Flavel. He was the former CEO. Well, I got rid of him, along with Alison Rose. In fact, he was so arrogant, he didn't even bother to respond to my emails. But he clearly backed the policy, which was I had to be gotten rid of because I did not align with the views of the bank. I wasn't a climate change enthusiast and many other things. Well, after a 6-month gap, Coutts have now appointed a new boss. Her name is Emma Crystal, and she takes over. She's had a big job at UBS, other big jobs in private banking over the years, and she's been UBS's Chief Sustainability Officer and executive sponsor of UBS's LGBT and Ally Network. So there we are. Coutts Bank clearly have learned absolutely nothing. And as far as I'm concerned, whilst I was angry about what was said in that subject access request, it was the consequent attempts just to try and brush the whole thing over with a so-called inquiry that never, ever asked the right questions. The cover-up, in my view, in my case, was far worse than the crime, and it hasn't gone away. Please believe me. Now, it's Six Nations rugby time. Huge audiences watching rugby at the weekends. Lots of speculation about which team's going to win. England just squeaking past Italy last week. Also talk that rugby should be banned for under-18s. I'm going to be joined by former England legend Andy Good to debate this and all rugby issues.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, Minister for Common Sense Esther McVey exclusively reveals what the woke brigade at the civil service are really getting up to. Labour's £28 billion green U-turn. Surely Ed Miliband has to go. Nigel Farage reacts after an Afghan refugee allegedly became a Russian spy, worked for MI6, the Foreign Office, GCHQ, and even met the King. Plus, Star Daily Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson asks, when will we stop importing women-hating values to our civilised Western society? That's Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11 p.m. Be there.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
What you've got to do is, it's a collective. You've got to look like a meteorologist. Nobody out there is necessarily going to be a meteorologist, but what I do on a daily basis is I look globally. I look at what we've got in terms of the track of weather that we've had in the UK. So if you go back a couple of years and we go back to the heat wave of July, August 2022, 40.3 degrees, there's a dot in the landscape, and before then there was other incidents going on. Now that was a huge dot because that was extreme temperatures, and then we, since then, last summer, although we didn't get that kind of record, we saw months with records, various months, May and June and September and October, all-time records. So another dot, and then you're looking again globally. What's going on globally? What's going on in China, in USA, in Africa, now in Australia, for example, records falling like 9 pins. So when these storms come along, you've got to say, okay, would they have happened anyway? The answer is probably yes, they probably would have done. But when you start getting where we're up to with Jocelyn is number 10, then that's not the record. The record is 11. Named storms, 2015-16. So we've been there before, but only a few years ago. So these things are starting to mount up. And do you know what? On the can of climate change, climatologists, better people than me, people who study this expertly, and they look at it and they say, okay, what we're going to get with extra dimension of heat in the atmosphere, which energy and heat that basically means that you've got more intense storms potentially that can carry more water. What do you get? You get higher wind velocities and you get more water and or snow. We've just gone through a period where parts of this country have been deluged and flooded for the first time.
Yes. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Talking Pints. I'm joined by Andy Good, former rugby legend, and I think you're a foreign exchange dealer now in the City of London, aren't you?
Yes.
Cheers. Yeah. Welcome to the programme. Now, it's rugby time. It's the Six Nations. It's the one time of the year when the public really get quite excited about rugby. They get big audiences watching on television. England just about scraped past Italy. What's going on?
Well, if you look at the scoreline, we've scraped past them. And Italy have improved immensely over the last few years. They had a really bad World Cup, but they've got a new coach in, and we've got some new young players who are exciting, on form in the Premiership, but they're trying to change how they're playing, so it's going to take a bit of time.
And lots of debutees in that.
Yeah, there was a fair few debutees, and we've lost some really big characters. The likes of Courtney Lawes has retired. Obviously, the news around Owen Farrell, he's out at the minute. Selected himself to step back from the game. So it was a good start. We could have won the game by 17 points. We scored a try just before the end. They scored right at the death, and it makes it look like a 3-point victory, and we scraped through. But
it's Twickenham, which is a magnificent stadium, isn't it? What a place to go. I mean, I love going to Twickenham. Who's going to win the Six Nations this year?
You'd be an odd person to look past Ireland at the minute, but Ireland do have to come to Twickenham. So if England can get on a roll, we've got tougher games as the tournament progresses. Wales will be a step up from Italy this weekend. Obviously, the fierce rivalry between the two countries.
Yeah.
But they've a very young side themselves, Wales. So I expect us to beat Wales. That grows momentum. That grows, a great atmosphere at Twickenham, hopefully, which the players are asking for, because there has been a huge disconnect between the fans and the team over the last couple of years, especially under Eddie Jones.
Yeah.
So they need to build up momentum, and then we got to Scotland and take on that enemy as well.
International rugby doing well, huge crowds, capacity. Club rugby in trouble. Clubs going bust. Somehow the professional game, it just hasn't quite got the audience, has it?
Well, you say that, but attendances are huge in the Premiership over the last few years. They're growing and growing, and we've seen the last few rounds where we've had sold-out stadiums all over the place. The issue is all the Premiership clubs were spending more than was coming through the door. So eventually, as in any business...
The wrong business model.
Yes. And it was, we're going to spend, hoping a big TV deal would come or something like that, akin to the football. But unfortunately, the Premiership and rugby isn't a global game. It's very... I played abroad in different countries, and they didn't necessarily watch the Premiership. And it's trying to grow that exposure to allow more money to come into the game. But you have to spend within your means. And that's where 3 teams went bust. They were spending way too much than was coming through the door, and then eventually the owner who's footing the bill says, I've had enough.
Yeah, I understand it, and all of this at a time when you've got academics saying that, rugby should be banned for the under-18s, and we'll come back to that in Dementia in a moment. Now, your own career, massive success with Leicester Tigers, at one point the all-time leading point scorer, there in the Premiership. Your England career, would it be fair to say your club career would have indicated more caps for England than you actually got?
Possibly, if you look back on it, yes. But then I was competing with a certain Johnny Wilkinson, who was the greatest English fly half ever. Unfortunately, sometimes in life you've got someone that's better than you. And I played for England 17 times.
Yes.
I was on the bench probably another 10 that I didn't get on. So very grateful to run out once for your country, let alone 17 times.
Yeah.
But with that, I'm competing with the best in the world at the time.
As you say, it was a bit unlucky to be around at the time of John, but that's
it happens. But
you had a great rugby career. Yeah. Now, so much talk in both football and rugby about dementia. I mentioned these academics saying under 18 should be banned from playing. Boris Johnson coming out strongly saying, no, that really mustn't happen. How do we get the balance right here?
Well, listen, first and foremost, rugby is an amazing game for kids, for adults, whether you're amateur, professional in the adult era, but also some of the benefits you get from a team sport and the values in rugby and everything it teaches you. Whatever level you get to, it's an amazing sport. So that's the first thing we need to harness and keep hold of. Yes, I understand these academics are talking about the issues with head injuries, and for them to come out and say, you shouldn't be playing rugby under the age of 18.
Child abuse.
It's child abuse. Absolutely ridiculous. Take no notice of that. It is the benefits far outweigh the dangers, and yes, there are dangers in any sport, in any walk of life. You know, you go onto a rugby field and it's a collision sport, it's a contact sport. You can find space, but you know there are going to be collisions. There are going to be injuries at times, and that's part of the beauty of playing. It's trying to win a game of rugby, and we've gone away a little bit from understanding. As kids, they don't. I've got a nephew that plays, and they don't keep score now. They're not allowed to keep score. You're not allowed to know who's won, and I find that baffling because life is about winning and losing and learning from both.
In the end
so,
it is.
For the academics to come out and talk about child abuse under 18 and try and get rugby banned, I think they need to get back in the box and go away. But it's a brilliant game that we need to play more of, under control. And the game's never been safer in terms of how players are looked after. With concussions and everything like that, and that's the key.
And winning and losing, of course, is the same with foreign exchange trading.
Yes.
You can make money, you can lose money.
Well, of course you can, yeah.
So were you a City boy?
No,
before rugby.
So I learnt about foreign exchange by playing abroad. You mentioned that I played in South Africa and France, and when you earn your own money, you take it a bit more seriously, which I certainly did, and that's how I looked into foreign exchange. And I met someone that worked in the industry. Obviously, rugby's a well-paid job while you're doing it, but you play your career. I played 18 years professionally. Most careers last about 10 years, and you're tasked with trying to be as good as you can at that, but you also want to come out of playing and have a good career afterwards as well. So I went into it for that reason, around my own money, and then learnt about the business. And now I'm still 8 years after retirement.
You were thoroughly enjoying it, aren't you?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I help companies that have a hedging requirement and an FX exposure, with mitigating risk. So. There's plenty of good days when you're helping clients out, and bad days when the market tanks as well.
Well, I have a sense, Andy, that you pretty much enjoy everything that you do in life, don't you?
Yeah, my greatest thing is I'm father to 6-year-old twins, twin identical girls, and everything's driven around that, and you've got to be successful and provide for your family, so you've got to work hard and do it with a smile on your face.
What a pleasure to have you on Talking Pints. Thank you very much indeed. Well, someone who knows about trading and making money and losing money, of course, is Jacob Rees-Mogg, a well-known investor in the markets over the years. Now, Jacob, I want to know, you read out the rule book last night, perfectly clear that the gallery is not to be engaged or involved in debate in Parliament. Did the Speaker do anything?
Well, I didn't raise it as a point of order in the House, so it hasn't been raised as far as I'm aware on the floor.
Right, but it can be.
The Speaker, if he'd wanted to, could have intervened, and the Speaker's always got a difficult choice to make, to allow the flow of debate to go or to be punctilious and sometimes pedantic about the rules, and sometimes at PMQs it's right to allow it to pass on. But the other thing is that Starmer got it wrong, because he said Mrs. Jai was in the gallery when she wasn't.
I know.
So he's misleading the House. Now, Boris Johnson seemed to be expelled for misleading the House. So I'm just wondering whether this might be...
I somehow don't quite think it qualifies, but I love it. Very, very quickly tonight, Jacob, what have we got?
We're going to be talking about Labour dropping its £28 billion in green stuff. This is wonderful news. The green agenda is making us cold and poor, and if the Labour Party is running away from it, perhaps we'll get to a more sensible position.
Yeah. Well, yes, and not that you'll agree with this, but it now means we have a Labour and Conservative Party almost indistinguishable from each other when it comes to policy. I mean, I can't tell the difference between them, but Jacob hasn't got time to respond this evening to that, I'm pleased to say. I'll be back with you live on Monday evening at 7 o'clock, and I'm very, very keen to see what the weekend weather is going to be like.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Hill snow continues in the north during the next 24 hours. Spells of rain at lower levels and further south across the country as milder Atlantic air starts to take over. That's been pushing up against cold Arctic air in the north, and in between we've had a spell of rain, sleet and hill snow. Some significant snow continues to build up from the Peak District into the southern uplands and also for the tops of the hills in Northern Ireland. Could cause some disruption overnight in places, but elsewhere, well, really at lower levels it's rain, and certainly in the south, a very mild night to come, 10 Celsius with heavy showers for parts of Wales the south and southwest. Those continue during Friday, further bouts of rain or showers moving through parts of England and Wales. Some brighter interludes at times, but a gusty wind. Meanwhile, the rain, sleet and hail snow pushes north, increasingly affecting eastern Scotland, where significant snow will build up during the second half of Friday and into the start of the weekend. 20 centimetres over the Grampians, for example, but rain generally at lower levels as we begin the weekend for the north and east of Scotland. Elsewhere, brighter spells for many on Saturday morning. Certainly some sunshine for the north, central and eastern part of England, but further showers come through from the west later on. And it's going to be much milder across most of the UK through the weekend, except for the far north of Scotland.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.